Narrative and worldview mechanics. Narratives and worldviews create supporting loops, like how a magnetic field will induce an electric field, and vice versa. All narratives and worldviews are originally sourced in reality. However, both are abstracted from reality in order to be contained in consciousness. Once abstracted, we can see how, on the one hand, narratives inform worldviews and justify actions, and on the other hand, worldviews project onto and evaluate narratives, potentially elevating or corrupting consciousness. The ego may also attempt to protect itself during both worldview and narrative construction, including, but not limited to, confirmation bias, laziness, avoidance of emotional pain and trauma, personal beliefs about self. Individual narratives and worldviews are one thing, but we often strive to form a collective consensus around them. Our zealous consciousness against false narratives and worldviews originates in either a fear that we are delusional and the resulting pain of self-delusional acceptance, the fear that delusions may justify immoral behaviors, or that they could corrupt the tree of knowledge that we hold so dear. And sometimes, respect for consensus as an inheritance from the gurus, scholars, and innovators of history might cause the ego to attach identity to these harbingers of truth, despite their human limitations to actually know truth. And thus, narratives and worldviews create supporting loops, like how an electric field will induce a magnetic field. Fractures in group consensus are the result of conflicting loops with other conflicting loops. The interference patterns between different streams of consciousness are ultimately expressed through time, with each stream at its own wavelength and intensity. Narratives can be a way to communicate a worldview. Dialogue involves comparing opposing worldviews and opposing narratives in an effort to try and determine reality from schism, where oppositional consensus and personal consciousness collide. When blame, accusations, and vilifying the claims and members of competing tribes, we may even descend to justifying division and atrocities. When an enemy is vilified, it only ensures that we ourselves become the villain to those that we vilify. It further grows when, as a collective, we are faced with our own narratives and worldviews in opposition to and allied with the narratives and worldviews of others. We are faced with a test of humility to let go of ego and let go of these looping delusions. Any narrative or worldview that ends in catastrophe rather than enlightenment and progress must be scrutinized with extreme prejudice and responsibility. A narrative or a worldview that justifies a delusion must always be, in essence, in direct opposition with truth. When the truth is revealed, those that cling to the lie will be caught in the spotlight of truth. Narratives and worldviews not only make claims and interpretations about the past, but also about the future, allowing for the possibility of the ends justifying the means, and often create self-fulfilling prophecies. And so the truth about the delusions of conflict is that they are the cause of the conflicts they produce. But at the same time, we must be wary of the complacency caused by other delusions. For example, although peace and progress must always be partly a self-fulfilling delusion, they must never be so naive and delusional that they fail to prevent catastrophe. Would anyone behave without justification? Regardless of how twisted our minds, when challenged by reality itself, we would falter before any lack of justification. No matter how far we fall, our justifications must eventually land on our narrative and worldview interpretation before acting. Surely, nobody would accept a narrative or worldview where they are painted as the villain. However, when faced with being projected onto by this narrative or worldview, there is a choice in how we respond. If it is true that we are the villains, We can either accept this narrative and actively redeem ourselves, or reject it and keep our current state. If it is false that we are the villains, we can either accept this narrative in order to make concessions, or reject it and prove our character through actions. The difference between accepting truth and rejecting a falsehood is not in the actions. The results are the same. Therefore, this is solely a differentiation on the level of narratives and worldviews. It is also important to keep in mind that it is generally false that anyone is the villain unless they are villainizing others. If only everyone would stop vilifying and prove character through actions, narratives and worldviews would no longer hold power over us.